What if one of the greatest turning points in human history never happened? What if the United States, the industrial giant that tipped the balance of World War II, had simply stayed out? Before we dive into this alternate timeline where the world's most powerful nation watched the war from across the ocean, make sure to subscribe and like, because this is one history lesson that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Imagine it's 1941. Europe is burning. Nazi Germany controls most of the continent. Britain stands battered but unbroken, and Japan is tightening its grip on the Pacific. In our reality, the attack on Pearl Harbor pulled America into the war, transforming it into the arsenal of democracy. But in this version of history, that moment never comes. Either Pearl Harbor doesn't happen, or if it does, America chooses restraint over retaliation. The United States remains neutral, focusing on rebuilding its own economy after the Great Depression instead of joining another overseas conflict. At first, it might seem like a decision rooted in reason. After all, isolationism had deep roots in American politics. Many citizens believed World War I had been a tragic mistake, a European mess that cost American lives for little gain. In this alternate timeline, President Roosevelt faces enormous pressure from Congress and the public to stay out. America First isn't just a slogan, it becomes policy. No draft, no troop deployments, no transatlantic convoys. Just words of sympathy from afar as the world tears itself apart. So what happens next? Without American troops or supplies, the balance of power in World War II shifts dramatically and fast. Britain, already weakened by years of bombardment and blockades, struggles to hold on. The Lend-Lease program, which in our timeline supplied Britain and the Soviet Union with vital equipment, never exists. That means no endless stream of tanks, planes, food, or fuel crossing the Atlantic. Britain's defenses weaken. The Royal Navy stretches thinner by the day. Eventually, Nazi Germany's U-boats choke off supplies entirely. London may not fall immediately, but the island becomes isolated, forced to negotiate with Hitler or face collapse. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union fights alone. In the real timeline, American supplies and equipment kept the Red Army alive through the darkest winters. Without them, Soviet industry faces impossible shortages of trucks, aluminum, food, even basic communication gear. Stalin's army still manages to slow the German advance, but at a far higher cost. Millions more die. The Eastern Front becomes a blood-soaked stalemate rather than a path to Berlin. By 1944, with no American invasion of Normandy and no Western Front, Germany faces only one major opponent, the exhausted Soviet Union. Hitler consolidates his power across Europe, reinforcing his regime in France, Norway, and the Balkans. The Holocaust continues, unchecked and undisrupted by Allied advances. Millions more perish as Nazi domination stretches unbroken from the Atlantic to the outskirts of Moscow. And across the Pacific, Japan's empire reigns supreme. Without U.S. intervention, Japan keeps expanding, taking the Philippines, Indonesia, and large parts of China's coastline. Britain's weakened navy can't stop them, and Australia becomes increasingly isolated. The Pacific turns into a Japanese lake, its trade routes dominated by Tokyo. Economically, America flourishes, at least on the surface. By avoiding the costs of war, the U.S. experiences steady growth throughout the 1940s, becoming an isolated industrial powerhouse. But that prosperity comes with a hidden cost. The technological explosion driven by wartime innovation, radar, jet engines, nuclear power, never fully materializes. The U.S. may remain wealthy, but it doesn't become the scientific superpower it was destined to be. Instead of the dawn of the American century, the 1950s become a period of cautious detachment, with a rich but inward-looking nation surrounded by chaos abroad. The post-war world, too, looks entirely different. Without American intervention, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan remain the dominant powers of their respective regions. Europe remains under fascist control, while Asia lives under Japanese imperial rule. The Soviet Union, even if it survives, is too weak to challenge either side. The Cold War never happens, not because peace reigns, but because democracy never gets the chance to rebuild and compete. And then there's the question of the atomic bomb. In our reality, the Manhattan Project, funded by the US government and fueled by fear of a Nazi nuclear weapon, ushered in the nuclear age. But if America never joins the war, that program doesn't get priority. Germany's own nuclear research, though primitive, continues unhindered. Imagine a world where Hitler develops the first atomic bomb, a weapon of unimaginable power in the hands of a dictator who's already conquered half the planet. Culturally, the world becomes unrecognizable. There's no greatest generation, no GI Bill fueling the rise of the American middle class. Hollywood doesn't produce wartime propaganda or post-war optimism. The idea of the free world fades away. The United Nations is never formed. Instead, the 1950s open with a global divide: fascist Europe, imperial Asia, and a neutral but uneasy America watching from the sidelines. But isolation never lasts forever. As the 1960s approach, America faces an impossible dilemma. Its economic interests are tied to global trade, yet the world is controlled by authoritarian empires. Germany dominates Europe's industries, Japan controls Asian markets, and the US finds itself slowly boxed in. By avoiding the war, it may have avoided short-term loss, but it sacrificed long-term influence. Eventually, the US either submits to economic dependency or faces the very war it once dodged, this time against far stronger enemies. Morally, the consequences are devastating. Without US intervention, the Holocaust continues unchecked. Millions more are exterminated before any regime change occurs. Entire generations are wiped out in silence, their voices erased from history. The world's conscience never experiences the shock that shaped modern human rights movements. No Nuremberg trials, no, never again. Humanity's darkest chapter goes unchallenged, and the moral lessons that define the modern age never take root. In the absence of justice, future atrocities are no longer unthinkable. They're simply unremarkable. In this alternate world, by 1970, a grim equilibrium emerges. A fascist superstate dominates Europe, its iron grip extending from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains. Japan reigns over Asia, reshaping borders and cultures under its empire's shadow. The Soviet Union fades into obscurity, crushed by internal decay and surrounded by enemies. The United States remains rich and free, but deeply isolated, surrounded by hostile powers that view its ideals as relics of a naive past. Its industries hum, its cities glow, but its spirit of leadership lies dormant. Democracy becomes a regional luxury, not a global aspiration. Across the oceans, communication between nations turns cold and cautious. Trade becomes tightly controlled, alliances are built on fear, and science serves only the state. Without international cooperation, progress slows. The world races toward technological power, but without moral restraint, nuclear weapons, genetic experiments, and advanced warfare develop unchecked. Humanity advances, but without humanity. Within the US, generations grow up hearing tales of a world lost to tyranny. Schools teach freedom as a local virtue, not a universal right. The idea of helping others becomes an afterthought, a relic of a more idealistic past. Yet beneath the calm surface, unease lingers. Americans sense that isolation cannot last forever, that the walls built for safety might one day become their own prison. The borders may keep enemies out, but they also keep the nation's ideals locked within. The land, once known as a beacon of liberty, now watches a darkened world in silence, wondering if peace bought through indifference was peace at all. Over time, cracks begin to show. trade dwindles, cultural exchange fades, and innovation slows. Without collaboration or moral purpose, America's growth turns inward, technological but soulless, prosperous but paranoid. People whisper about the outside world, but few dare to travel. The Statue of Liberty still stands, but her message feels hollow, her torch dim against the encroaching shadows of authoritarian empires. And yet, in quiet corners, a few voices begin to question everything. Veterans haunted by what they witnessed overseas, scholars who studied the rise of tyranny, and young dreamers searching for meaning beyond comfort, all begin to ask whether America's neutrality was truly a shield or a silent surrender. They debate in dimly lit cafes, write forbidden essays, and share whispers of a world that could have been free. Their movement is small, fragile, but it carries a spark, a belief that the American spirit was never meant to hide behind borders. As decades pass, that spark refuses to die. Hidden schools teach the true meaning of liberty, underground networks share banned literature, and murals appear on city walls bearing one word: remember. The memory of what the United States once stood for, hope, courage, and global unity, becomes a quiet rebellion against the isolation that once defined it. And in that defiance, a powerful truth begins to resurface: that freedom, once buried, always finds a way to rise again. It's a haunting vision of what might have been, but also a reminder of what was saved. History's greatest turning points often rest not on chance, but on the courage to act when the world hesitates. The United States' entry into World War II didn't just shift the outcome of a war, it redefined what humanity chose to stand for. One choice separated oppression from liberty, fear from progress, and silence from hope, guiding the world once again from darkness into light. So what do you think? Was U.S. involvement in World War II inevitable? Or could isolation have truly kept the peace? Would America have remained safe or eventually faced an even greater threat? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the alternate paths history could have taken.